understand something in a way that makes sense in their daily lives, then adoption simply doesn't happen. And honestly, at Exonumia, we believe that language is infrastructure. So, just like how electricity, internet, and even roads, is infrastructure, language is. And language determines who gets included and who gets left out. And when it comes to Bitcoin education, this is even, so critical, because if a person doesn't understand it, they are immediately excluded from the conversation. So when we localize, we unlock understanding and ownership, And I think you guys have already seen. Yesterday, I saw a very powerful example from Rwanda. So the Rwanda Cultural Heritage Academy recently developed the country's first ICT dictionary in Kenya, Rwanda. I looked at that dictionary and truly, truly, it really has 1,700 technological terms in their own language. And for me, that is just so powerful. The first word that I Googled, that I searched in that dictionary is the word blockchain, and it is there. They are explaining the word blockchain in Kinyarwanda. And for me, that is localization, that is inclusion, and basically that is what will lead us into adopting these technologies. So anyway, without any further ado, today we've brought together incredible speakers who are working in the space. They are working in language, they are working in technology, and they are working in accessibility. So we are going to give each speaker a maximum of 15 minutes to share their insights and their experiences. And then if you have questions, I think you can just put
A
it
maximum of what?
15 minutes. 1-5. I hope that's enough. So yeah, Kgothatso, you'll get 15, Chido will get 15, and Tebogo will get 15. And I'm hoping that in that 15 minutes, maybe speak for 12 minutes, and then we leave the 3 minutes to maybe one or two questions from any questions that might arise. And if we could put our questions in the chat, I will be going through the chat, and then we can just put our questions there. And yeah, I also want to encourage the speakers to, let's just keep it practical and not a lot of theory. I think experiences, real community stories, and yeah, I think that will be such a great thing. Because at the end of the day, the goal is simple. How do we make Bitcoin understandable, accessible, and usable for everyday people? So yeah, that is what we are here for. So the time is 10 minutes after 6, and I think we can get into it. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Chido Musodza. And I was so, when I saw your Twitter handle, right? It says Miss Chic Mystique. And I'm like, Shido, I didn't I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. But yeah, this is Miss Chido, and she works with the localization lab. And I'm not going to go into her bio because I think that she will, she can introduce herself better than I would. So yeah, Chido, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen really quickly so that we get this started. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes,
we
can.
can.
Okay. All right, give me a second. Right. So my name is Chido Musodza, and I work at an organization called Localization Lab. We essentially work at the intersection of what we call language activism, or simply language, digital rights, human rights, and technology. I'm happy and also privileged to have my colleague Adriano Gomes on the team, who is our localization manager, who's very capable of the work. And he's just here as support today. So I'm going to be talking about localizing Bitcoin for real adoption beyond translation. So maybe one thing I wanted to mention before I start off is when I started working on translation of open source apps, tools, resources, it met me at a time when I was trying to start to understand what the digital rights space looked like and what that felt like and how we could actually do more work. And so when an opportunity was presented for me to localize an app, I simply jumped at it, primarily out of curiosity. So I started off as a volunteer translation at Localization Lab, and now I actually work there. Right, so let's get this started. So at Localization Lab, we believe that technology is only as powerful as its accessibility. And in the context of Bitcoin, which is a tool for financial sovereignty, language isn't just about words, but it's also primarily trust. And today, we're moving away from the academic definitions to look at how language determines whether someone in an underserved community, what we call an marginalized or vulnerable community as well, feels safe enough to use a Bitcoin wallet. So people often use the terms translation and localization interchangeably, right? And this is kind of like the translation versus localization wallet test. But they represent very different levels of engagement with language and also with tools and resources as you come to them. So translation in itself is a literal word for word conversion of text from English or any other major language a source language, which could be Spanish, it could be Portuguese, as well, to a target language, which is like Chishona for me, because I'm a Zimbabwean and so I speak Chishona, or Swahili, or Zulu, or also Venda, or any other of those languages that exist. Whereas localization, which is called L10N for short, is the holistic adaptation of the experience. So you're not just looking at the literal word for word translations, but you're also bringing in the context and the experience of using that word or of using a tool or a resource into that translation of that particular word or phrase or source strings. So it accounts for cultural nuances, local metaphors. I would also include value systems there and technical usability within a specific locale. And when we talk about locale, we're simply referring to language or dialects, as is the case in Africa. So, an example of failure versus success here. What does failure look like when you fail to translate or to localize, and what does success look like when you've succeeded to localize? So, a failure, right, would be a case where early educational materials are translated, such as the term seed phrase, right? Which is this comes from the Bitcoin world, but I think it's also happened when you work on two-step or two-factor authentication of your apps. There sometimes appears words like seed phrase. And literally, what's happened in the past is it's translated to botanical seeds for a garden, or just we may call them garden seeds, or we may simply call them seeds, but in reference to botanical seeds for a garden. And this leads to a massive confusion about why a digital app was talking about farming. Because for a lot of people, especially because we're looking at people that are vulnerable and already struggle to use these tools and these resources, we try to want to make them simple, but sometimes in wanting to make them simple, and making reference to something that's very literal in a sense, we cause confusion, and sometimes it results in quite a bit of danger for people. So the localized success now would be where a project, instead of using metaphors related to ancestral secrets or master keys, concepts that immediately signal protection, legacy, and access to the local user. So, why is localization the engine of adoption or of us trying to get to use this tool a little better or to try to understand how best we can use this tool or get other people to use the tool within their mother tongue? Well, it's essentially three things, right? That's needed. It's trust and safety. It's reducing what we call the cognitive load, or just reducing the load on the brain, on having to think too much of what is it that I am encountering with this user experience or this interface, and cultural ownership. So in underserved communities, localization is a tool for digital dignity and real world impact. And so when we talk about trust and safety, we're talking about how proper localization prevents fat finger errors. So what we mean there is if a send button, right, the button that's written send on any tool that you've encountered or on your phone, if there's a button that says send within an app that you're using, is translated as a generic go or move. Users may use funds because they don't understand what you mean by go or move. They may think go means go forward or move means move forward. So what do we mean when we say fat finger error? We're simply saying a keyboard input mistake or a mouse misclick that results in incorrect information being transmitted. And it often occurs in this often happens in financial markets. But when you think of Bitcoin, it's a financial um, tool, right? So you may actually wind up losing your Bitcoin, your hard-earned money, your hard-earned Bitcoin, your hard-earned currency, because you've made a mistake and you've gotten incorrect information to be translated to be transmitted. So these errors can lead to a significant or unintended consequences, such as incorrect transactions or financial losses. And then when we talk about reducing cognitive load, as I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to say is a person doesn't have to go through the process of learning a second language. And in this case, it's English. I mean, meet me at the point of my mother tongue, right? Just for me to achieve financial freedom. Just meet me at the point of my mother tongue so that I'm able to achieve this financial freedom. And then we're all home and dry. And then when we're talking about cultural ownership, what we're essentially saying there is when Bitcoin speaks a local language, it stops being this westernized tech or tech for tech bros, and becomes a local tool for the community. So, when we talk about the sensitivity of terminology and AI risks, I mean, AI is a real thing. It exists in the space. It's not going anywhere. So we need to also make the considerations there as well, right? So Bitcoin terminology is uniquely difficult because it's simultaneously technical, financial, and philosophical. I think KG can attest to this the difficulty, I think Momo and Tebogo as well. So when we're talking about contextual sensitivity, right? What we're essentially saying is how do you translate the word mining in a region where physical mining is a sensitive political or environmental issue? I think people in Zimbabwe, and I think to an extent people in South Africa can attest to how mining, because of the amount of resources, or let's do one better and say maybe DRC, that's really resource rich in the mining sector. And we need to step back and think about that and say, within that context, how do you explain the term or the phrase Bitcoin mining without it becoming sensitive politically or without it becoming an environmental issue? So a literal translation within that context is polarizing, right? And then there's the AI trap for low resource languages. And as you may note, low resource languages is in quotes. There's a reason for that. Low resource languages essentially refers to how we see them from the Western context. But when you look at it from the African context, we have a lot of oral passing down of languages. And so our languages are very resource rich. It's just that there's no true understanding of how do we look at using our language to create these tools and resources within the African context. So the AI trap here would be hallucination of generative AI, right? So AI sometimes invents grammar for languages because its training is, or the training data that exists for that particular language is very thin, but I would also want to say non-existent in some cases. And so we need to do the legwork to change that. But that's a whole other conversation to talk about. And then there's the bias loop. And when we say the bias loop, what we're saying is AI defaults to the most colonial or formal version of a language, and it ignores the street level dialects where Bitcoin adoption actually happens. So the young people who are curious and want to use this tool, what are they saying about what these words could possibly mean in the language and the lingo that they use? So we need to take away the bias in order for us to move forward and actually have the adoption actually happen at their level. So meet people where they are. So the takeaway there is AI is a starting point, but the human in the loop aspect is non-negotiable for financial software because it's humans that understand cultural nuance, that understand what language works and is relevant currently. AI doesn't do that. AI simply receives information and transmits it back up. So as I'm starting to wrap up now, so what are the best practices for the field? And some of these would be community first glossaries, which are where terms should be decided by the community using the tool, and not a translator in some remote office in some other part of the world. So what we see already happening is a lot of the prescriptive language that comes around Bitcoin and the like comes from the tech bros. But really, is that where we should be getting the languages and the terms from, or we should be going the route of Rwanda, where they're actually developing it for the community that they exist in. And then there's prioritizing clarity over elegance. Yeah, elegance is one thing, guys, but clarity is even more important. So what we mean by that is being technically correct is less important than being unmistakably clear, right? And being technically correct, yeah, it's nice and it's bougie and it's fashionable, but being unmistakably clear is what moves us forward. And then there's iterative testing. And what we mean by iterative testing is we mean repeated testing, testing as much as possible, as often as possible. So don't just translate, but observe a local user trying to navigate the app and note the difficulties and the possible language they may need to change. Ask them questions because their confusion is the most valuable data. That's what pushes us forward. And then one other thing here is the double blind approach. This is one of Adri's favorite phrases, which is where we're saying have 2 to 5 people that are working on translating a tool, maybe 3 translators and 2 reviewers. But none of them should know each other, right? They should understand the glossary, they should understand the style guide, but they shouldn't really know that each of them is essentially working on this particular resource. And there are ways and means to do that, to ensure that there isn't like an overlap in the way people are working. Um, and the reason why we say that is because we want to ensure that what you're getting out of that process is the highest quality work that is produced, and that the task of localization is always done from an objective point of view. So what's the bottom line as we wrap up? The bottom line here is we're not just translating apps, but we're translating the future of money. It's a reality. And here we're not talking about investment as people often want to talk about. It's not just an investment tool. It's a tool that ensures survival for some people. It's a tool that ensures that someone within an emergency situation is able to receive money. It's without charges. It's getting to the intended destination and it's being used in the correct context for whatever is needed at the time. There's a lot of real world use cases for how Bitcoin could work, and not the speculative aspects of investment and money. That's not what we're talking about here, just to clarify. So if we want real adoption, we must ensure that the manual for financial freedom is written in the language of the people's hearts and not just their dictionaries. Thanks, Momo. I will stop here. Hey, Momo, you're muted.
Jokes on me. Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Chido. So, the last point that you made, right, when you were closing, I liked that because there's a quote by Nelson Mandela where he says, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head, right? But if you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart. So when you go to people in a language that they dream in a language that they live in, it really goes to their hearts. Especially when it comes to Bitcoin, you said it. It's financial. If you talk to people about money, I mean that's a very sensitive topic, and it's also philosophical and it's also technical. So those three things are just, yeah, it makes it very hard. But thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing your insights. And yeah, I'm sure the questions will come at the end because now we have to move on to Tebogo. So thank you, Chido. Our next speaker is Tebogo Makgakga. Tebogo is a translator with Exonumia, and I think she's one of the earliest translators who joined the Exonumia team when we were starting. She's translated a lot of articles for us, and she's also a reviewer. And yeah, Tebogo, you can take the floor. You can request to share, and then I will give you the permissions. Thank you.
Okay, hello.
Hi, Tebogo, welcome. Are you going to share on your side?
Okay. Let me just share quickly. Hi, everyone.
Hey, hey.
Hey, hey.
You are in Exonumia Regalia. Yes, ke.
Okay, just let me know if you can see the screen, then I'll go to the presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Tebogo Makgakga, and then I'm going to be speaking specifically on translation, but based on Shona Bitcoin translation experience. So my background starts off with my formative years. And when I look at translation, I look at it as the ability to transfer information through different forms. So it could be either written, it could be verbal, braille, signing, depending on the language of choice or language that's accessible to the audience. And then with regards to how I got interested into like translating, it was more about my upbringing. So I come from a family where my mom was Shona and my dad is Spedi. So because of that, in the household, we would speak one language with one parent. So that's how my translation journey began. And then as I would also visit like the paternal side of the family, if you needed to buy stuff, it was in the Popo vendor area. I needed to pick up the language, which is Chivenda and so forth. So I would then like translate and find similarities and differences from Chivenda into Shona, and certain words could mean the same thing, or sometimes the same word could mean something different. And as I went on, I would also like watch Takalani Sesame when I was younger for my Sipedi language sort of upskilling, as well as probably ask my dad, what does this sentence mean? And then from a like written and reading perspective, there was a book called Sisutu Salibua. It was an Oxford book, and then my cousin gave it to my sister, and then I also used that to sort of get basics from a basic written A1 level of the language. Okay, so as I move forward, then how did Exonumia translation come about? So when Kgothatso decided to do the open source project for Africa and African native languages, he asked me to source someone who could write and read in Shona. But unfortunately, in 2021, when I went to Zimbabwe, there was like a lockdown. So in the end, I ended up putting my hand up and I did the translation. And so I did a list of some of the articles that I translated. And I think the most technical was the peer-to-peer electronic cash system by Satoshi Nakamoto. So I think I did that for like a month or so. And then a few years later, I then also asked to do translation, and I did the Bitcoin Beach one in 2024, I think around June. And then the book review for 21 lessons. So my sister also is a translator for Exonumia, so she did the translation of 21 lessons, and then I did the review. So yeah, I think that's that from what I've done from a Bitcoin article side. And then the important things that I would say one has to consider from a translation perspective would be direct translation. So there are certain words like lightning node, hard wallet, trustless, you've got your escrow and, Merkle branch. So one could translate it directly, right? But then it would lose meaning. So for words like that, then one just leaves them as is. So I think I put an example where I talked about the lightning node. So if I was to translate it into Chishona, it would be nodi many, but it doesn't mean anything. So in those instances, I would just leave it as lightning node. And then if, say, for example, like a hard wallet, it would be Chikwama Chakaoma, which also again doesn't really mean anything. So in those instances, I just leave the word as is. But if, say, it's something like peer to peer, I could say shamwari kushamwari, but then in brackets, I keep the English word. So it just depends. I assess based on the context or the phrase that I'm looking at. And then when it comes to numerical words, so if the counting words are, let's say, 100 or 1,000, depending on the context, if it's going to confuse the audience, I'll leave it as numbers. But if it's going to make sense, then I can translate it. However, if then it's a number like 21 million, right, I'll just probably leave it as 21 million, or I would use the Shona words for 21, and then because most of the words at that level will then become more like an English version, like million or billion or whatever. So either way, whether you keep it as is or whether you translate it, the meaning still holds, right? But then something like infinity, right, would be like Gumine Faraja. So it just depends. If it's too statistical, then I'll just leave it as an infinity sign and then not not actually translate it. So it's what drives how I translate depends on how the audience will receive it. And then I think in the cashless article, there was a part which was talking about the statistics, like, your sigmas, your probability greater than Q. In that instance, I leave it as is. However, the word itself, probability, I could use like something like a chance or mukana in Shona or something like that. But I have to just, assess the situation to say, okay, if I translate this term, when I look at an average reader, are they going to understand it? Because maybe they don't have a mathematical background, so they might not understand it quickly. So if that's the case, then I just leave the words as is. And then when we're talking about context, so if it's an informal article where some words may, how like people will be talking about in sarcastic terms or tonality, then they would say something like foolish, or maybe people are talking about prices going up or down, and they're just talking about I am hodling. I think the I am hodling, where they were saying not everyone is skilled enough to or is able to assess markets to know when to actually sell or buy. So then in that context, that writer was talking about how they would just leave it as is, right? But if they use a word like a fool, I wouldn't translate it directly to say fool or fuza in Shona, because that is going to be sort of derogatory. So in that instance, I'll just use probably negation of wisdom. So something like the person is not wise enough or something, just to be sensitive to whoever would then read the article in Shona. Okay, so I think that's most of the things that I consider in that in the translating aspects. And then the challenges that I think are faced in the ecosystem are mainly academic language terminologies will differ as time goes on, because as we know, like the native languages have dialects. So sometimes you might find that someone who speaks Chishona from like Harare, or someone who speaks Chishona from Arondera, will still have 80% of the language, but certain words may be different. So as a translator, you may then think, okay, how best do I translate? But I always suggest that it's best to translate based on the language you grew up speaking. Then, since it's an open source platform, if someone thinks there's a better word, they can just do that, because you don't want to trip up on just one word, whereas you've got 5,000 words to translate. Yeah, and then also the change of like the lingua franca, or like the language on the street, right? Because mostly you find that even with Shishona, it's a combination of adopted languages as well. Like from colonial time, there's a bit of Afrikaans, a bit of Chicheo, a bit of Ndebele, depending on the people who were there at certain periods in time. Certain words that are like the it word for the informal article, now in 5 years when someone reads, that might not be the it word. So I guess you still translate it based on the current events. However, you know that, okay, the reader in the next 5 years is probably not going to understand that word. And it's okay, because it's probably a low impact kind of translation issue. And then with the dialect issue, I think Chido already touched on that, so I won't go too much into detail on that one. And then an example that I have is the Bitcoin Beach translation, where they were talking about how they had to set up a team to create the circular economy. But in that instance, I didn't use probably like a word that someone would expect me to use, because for team, they're in Shishona, they're like, there has to be a context of what exactly is happening around that team. So the way he talked about it, he mentioned that it's like people he knew and there's camaraderie and so forth. So I actually used a watered down version, which is Timu, mainly because I knew that the average user, if I use like Sangano or Bato or Chikwata, that's more a word that's known by someone who's much older. So there are instances where I can water down a word just to ensure that probably people between 18 and 40 or something like that can actually understand what is being referred to and the context of the article. And then I think the other part where we find challenges is access to Braille and sign language translators is limited. So I think I haven't come across any Bitcoin material in that. So that's something that can actually be addressed. Yeah, and then I move on to risks of using AI for low resource languages. So in my opinion, it would be, I guess, the fact that the language will be translated by maybe one person or two person, and then the AI will be fed whatever that language is. And then the issue of dialects from an African context, or I guess a global South context, will come up, because that then means whenever someone does a translation, the translation may be direct, but it won't really mean anything. So I think you have instances where one uses you, but in different contexts. So if I'm talking to like an older person, the you version would like be more of a salutation from friend to friend. But then if I mean, from an elder to someone younger. But if it's someone my age, it would be a friend to friend. Like maybe in French, I think they have something similar like that. So again, in African languages, you have that. So you might find that when someone then translates you, they can actually be doing it in a disrespectful way. So that's one of the things AI might not get right. And then the whole thing of geographical location sensitivity, which is that when translating, like the example I gave about being foolish, like mental health and how it's viewed and so forth, or words that don't necessarily have one word, or they use an umbrella word, but then that umbrella word is derogatory, then that can then occur because the person who's fed the words fed it in that manner. So the audience will then be insulted when they read the work. And then again, also the context or the complexities of financial information is when translating, it could directly translate in a way that it can recommend or guide the person to then make decisions that were not intended, but because of translations were then sort of suggested. So I think those are the issues that will come up with the AI. And in these countries, or in African countries, we've got minority languages where mostly in schools, they then have to take the language that's like most known. So I think in Zimbabwe, there is Tonga, Nambia. You also have Sutu from Gwanda and Xhosa and stuff. But you find that most of the people from those areas end up probably taking the closest language. Probably if it's Tonga, they probably have to take Shona. If it's Sutu, they have to take Ndebele. So again, if we don't have people from those regions actually feeding any AI, they are going to have a greater gap from an information access perspective. Yeah. So, and also you won't find reviewers as well if, say, they are like a small population and so forth. Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of tools that I normally use Word, and then I'll probably bold it once I've like finished the part that I finished. For words that complex, I just make it red, and like I use the Excel software for tracking, so like the percentage of the document that I've actually gone through and so forth. Yeah, so that's my style. Then I also get peer reviewers. So I can get maybe my sister because she's the one who's closest, or sometimes if it's a very difficult like phrase, I can call my aunt and just say, okay, this is this. Is it appropriate if I'm referring to an elder or so forth? And then they'll give their 2 senses, or I can find another Shona speaker and then they'll say, okay, this is fine, but why don't you try this and that? So that's how I self check or get a reviewer. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Debo. I think from the top of my head right now, I have one question for you before we get to the other questions at the end. So did your understanding of Bitcoin improve pre and post you doing the translation work?
Okay, so as you're translating, you're also reading, right? So I guess for me, the technical stuff would make sense mainly because of my background, because I did do actuarial and financial mathematics. So the statistical stuff would sort of make sense. And, however, like the more technical, like your Merkle, roots and branches and SegWit and so forth, yeah, I guess that would confuse me because I'm not like a developer or a technical person in that instance. Or if there's code and stuff, then that would sort of confuse me. But the more laid back and formal articles would make me understand, because if someone is giving something like uh, an apple as an analogy, or something like an abacus as an analogy, then that makes it easier for me to actually understand what a lightning node is, or what's happening when people like send transactions to each other.
Oh, okay. All right. No, that makes sense. So we're going to move on to our final speaker. It's Kgothatso Ngako, and
Oh,
honestly,
you don't give other people a chance to ask questions. Hey, this MC, yeah, whoever. That a person maybe didn't have enough internet, or they didn't have enough space on their device, or they were using a what was the word I'm looking for? A feature phone, right? Or some people call it a dumb phone. So that's what Machankura aimed to solve, right? So to those who don't know, let me just share my screen a bit. So Machangura is basically, oh, and since I'm presenting on multiple devices, I don't have to ask anyone if I'm sharing the screen. I can see that I'm sharing the screen. So Machangura is basically a service that's accessible via text. We do have an app as well, but the primary interface was USSD. And USSD, the thing that makes it work is that it can be dialed on any phone, right? Feature phone, smartphone, whatever else. That's the Machangura USSD there, which is a star 134 star 7714. This is the one for South Africa, right? So you dial that, and then because now I have too many apps that do calls, it's asking me questions, and then says USSD code running. It basically contacts our service, and then our service respond with whatever you want to do, right? And then now a user can then check their balance and send out Bitcoin or spend their Bitcoin. So I have around 150 rands worth of Bitcoin. I can go back to the menu. So this is effectively the same as the wallet you would have on your phone. It's just that this is now all within a text interface, right? The rules are very simple. The user has to respond within 20 seconds or the session times out. The service also has to respond within like 5 seconds or the session times out. And now a person could basically have Bitcoin, use that Bitcoin to buy vouchers. Think Pick n Pay is generally a good voucher. Pick n Pay is a grocery store, to those who don't know. And yeah, you can then get a code. And the other thing we did was always, back to the conversation of localization, always show the rand value, which is 5 rand, and the Bitcoin value, which is 415 sats, right? The reasoning and the reasoning is so that a person gets used to the Bitcoin exchange rate. But the other thing, which was a conscious decision, was what comes first between rands. So the connection problem, right? This is because I've not responded in 20 seconds. So now I'm just gonna switch off this. How do I go back? Oh yeah, cool. So I can leave meeting. Cool. So yeah, the question from and the decision that needed to be made was basically, how does a person who's using Bitcoin for the first time get used to the fact that this amount being shown is very different to the amount that they're used to on a day-to-day basis, right? So yeah, we made the decision to have 5 rands and then have whatever the Bitcoin value is on that day. Although I'm like a Bitcoin purist, in my world, we would first show the Bitcoin value and then show the rand value. Or not show the rand value at all. Default, and the first thing that's shown is the user's native currency and how much that is in Bitcoin. Oh yeah, the internet, the laptop is telling me my connection is not stable, so let me know if I cut off. Anyway, the other thing, now this is me sharing another thing. Oh no, do I have permissions to share? Let me share. Yeah, so now for this part of the presentation, yeah, so I thought I was maybe gonna do the demo via WhatsApp. You can access the service via WhatsApp as well. It's basically the same service, it's just a different platform, because almost everyone has a WhatsApp account these days, right? So yeah, no. Oh, so it's asking you if you want to complete that previous session. So maybe let me just say yes. On USSD, we were stuck on the confirmation screen with the Pick n Pay voucher. Nope, that didn't work out. So hey, things have broken. There's so many bugs on this. I need to sit down and figure out what's wrong. Anyway, okay, cool. I'm not here to show that. So what I wanted to show is the dream, right? The dream that started it all is Wiki. This is the first version of Exonumia. To those who don't know, I'm on the Wayback Machine. It used to be called exonumia.cc. And yeah, you basically got on the main page, and this was the first thing you saw. Welcome to Bitcoin. And a tweet by Jamison Lop. And for me, this tweet encapsulates all the things you need to know about Bitcoin, right? All the questions you need to ask. Who should I trust? Nobody. When should I sell? Never. Is Bitcoin dying? Because no. What have I gotten myself into? Nobody knows. How do I know? So on and so forth. And then this got translated into a Shwambo, which is Namibian language. Hopefully, this got archived on the Wayback Machine. No, it didn't. Okay, so yeah, that's how the Wayback Machine works. Sometimes things just don't get archived. Okay, cool. So that is the only thing that got archived. Now, this is what went wrong. This was running on a server, and one day I didn't pay for the server. A month, effectively. For the whole month, I didn't pay for the server. They sent me a reminder, and I only saw the reminder when they said, yo, we've just deleted your resource because you haven't paid. And I paid, and then I tried to access the server again, and everything was gone, right? So this version of the website in all its glory effectively does not exist anymore, right? It's gone forever. So we ended up having to say, okay, yes, we do like what the Wikipedia engine is giving us, Wikimedia, right? And then what I wanted was something like this. I like the fact that Wikipedia is basically the most localized platform in the entire world, the most localized thing in the entire world. The interesting thing about their localization is that technically every language its own knowledge sphere, right? As you can see, English has like 7 million articles, Dutch has 3 million articles, so on and so forth. The simple thing would be, of course, to translate the English articles into all the other languages. But what the people in Wikipedia are doing are effectively creating new forms of articles for each language. Some articles are direct translations, but most articles in all of these languages are literally fresh. Okay, and I guess what you're sharing with the Rwanda example, Mo, is an example of fresh localization or fresh information and so on and so forth. But anyway, I took this and I was like, okay, we need this, but in a decentralized format. And Exonumia in its current form was born out of that. It's basically like a documentation engine, and then you could pick a language. These were the sponsors that we've gotten over the years, and English, right? So it's also open source. The idea was we should be able to easily take this and deploy it elsewhere, right? Yeah, so this is the open source version of it. Every time you we push something, it gets automatically published. Let me see, where is this? I don't think I can find it here, but I can find it here. It gets automatically published into our GitHub page, exonumia.cc GitHub page. And yeah, so that is effectively exonumia.africa now. If you click on that, you go back. So the benefit of this, I always have a copy on my laptop. I always have a copy on GitHub. I always have a copy on another laptop. So we will never be in a position where we lose the translations ever again, because at least there's multiple copies at all times. What else did I want to share? Oh, some other decisions that were made was that this is not just a translation project, but a community project, right? So on each page, what we wanted to show is, let's say, Ashrambo, this one is the Angola version of Ashrambo. Let me see if we have the Namibian one. Oh yeah, here it is. Cool. So, but it's basically the same. Yeah. So what we wanted to do is showcase who the translator was. Oh, this is weird. This doesn't write who the translator was, and also showcase who the sponsor was. So let me see. Oh, okay. This is a Bitcoin white paper. So what is happening here? Okay, I'm a
The
little
Shona
lost.
one.
Yeah, maybe Shauna has it. Yeah, but the whole idea is we highlight who the translator was and who the funder is. Okay, cool. So here, was a translator and BitMEX was the sponsor, right? So we form the community, and then if you want to contact Devo, if she doesn't mind sharing her contact, it's a hyperlink. This one goes to her Instagram, which is weird because everyone uses some Twitter or text-based social network. But yeah, it is what it is. Wait, how do I get back? Now I'm not able to do this. Oh, okay. Okay, let me do this. Okay, cool. There it is. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh yeah, and the other thing is, if you go to like the Twitter, the Exonumia Twitter page, what you find is Exonumia Africa. What you find is we have a list, right? So for all the translators that do have a Twitter, you can then find them in our Twitter list. So let me just go to view list over here. And yeah, so for each language, we try to kind of put them in all their languages. And then we have one for all the Exonumia translators that have a Twitter, which was 16. Kenya community, I don't know if this was by me or somebody else, but yeah. Yeah, most of the languages only have one translator. So I think Swahili was the strongest individual. Oh yeah, that's why I called it Kenya community. Why didn't I call it Swahili? But yeah, was the strongest individual language outside of South Africa. Oh, and this was probably me being lazy to list all the individual translators or for each language in South Africa. So I just plotted everyone into the South Africa community. Oh yeah, Swahili translator, there it is, with 8 members. And translation advocates. Okay, I don't know. This is things I forgot what and why I was doing them. Yoruba translators as well. So yeah, but the whole idea was for this to be a community. So yeah, Mo, I don't know. Did I eat my time?
You ate all of it. So can you go to mantra
Okay.
fast?
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, let me move to another laptop. Sorry about that. Let me just switch off my video here. Who please approve. Which desktop am I on? This one. Share. Cool. Where is Mantra? Hey. Yeah, apologies, ladies and gentlemen. This is running on my local machine because I've been meaning to deploy this, but yeah, time is limited. Right? So yeah, this is Mantra. The whole idea behind it is we need a way to manage translators and editors and so on and so forth, and the translation. So entities would basically be the translators, and then we'd have a thing like a library where you can add an item, right? So things like the Bitcoin white paper, Welcome to Bitcoin Newcomers, which is that Jameson Lop thing, who should I trust, so on and so forth. And then you can maintain the languages it's in. I think is it in Twi? Let me see. Oh, yeah, so it's in Twi as well. So somebody did the translations for that in Twi. Sadly, I didn't write out who that person is here. But the other thing about it is you could then make it a project, right? So Exonumia Africa is what you see on the exonumia.africa website. Oh, yeah, so this is the Twi one. But here I have the person who was translating as a translator. So I don't know who did this one. I need to find out. Then what was happening? So let me see it here. Okay, the translator for all of that. Oh yeah. So the other thing we do here is you could filter to see all the translations that were assigned to this specific translator, or you could filter to see all the Iwe translations, right? And then what else? Yeah, so it's basically a management, translation management thing. But yeah, I demoed it to the wonderful guys at Localization Labs, and they gave us great feedback, and we still working through that feedback so that we release it publicly off of my laptop. Yeah, and the whole thing, and I think Chido was posting in the chat that Word and Excel are a good foundation for translations. And fun fact, most of our translators actually were using either Word or Excel, right? So what ended up being the thing is that we would then export like a spreadsheet that we would send to the translators, right? So this is an example of what the spreadsheet would look like. Of course, English on one side, the language being translated on the other. Then you could then see, okay, this one hasn't been translated. All the translator would do is just input their translation here. And the other thing we did is, at the top is A, B, C, F, right? So we hid some cells. Here's E, and then here's D, right? So these are identifiers. So these would allow us to then import this spreadsheet back into our into Mantra, and then users would be able to use it. Of course, there's a lot more than this, but yeah, I think we are short on time. Well, we are not short on time. I wasted my time talking about some law when I should have been talking about Mantra. Yeah, the other thing though with it was a campaign. So if a person wants to make a campaign for Zulu translations of Learn Bitcoin, they could put it up and say how much they would want to do to get paid to make this translation, or pledges if a person wants to pledge. Yeah, but everything basically circulates around the library and the project. And the library, funny enough, is in Markdown. And the other funny thing is Markdown is now becoming like the default language for AI, which I hate. Right, but anyway, it is what it is. So yeah, any questions?
Sure. That was a mouthful, KG.
Yeah,
Would you perhaps have a link for us to like maybe play around the tool and see how, like, just
yeah, yeah.
around it.
Yeah, it should. I actually have a link, but then the server doesn't work anymore because it's out of date.
Okay, please fix the link and then you can send it to us and then we can, play
Okay.
around it, because so far we only know what we see, but I think it would be really great for us to play around it, especially the translators. Are there any questions for Kgothatso or Chido or Tebogo? We are out of time, so maybe the next 3 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, because it's 4 minutes past 7. So if we could be done by 10 past 7. But I think I have a question for
No, you just muted.
yeah, I
You
know.
have a question for?
For Chido. Chido, maybe not a question, but I know we have like two fairly new translators on the call. Can you just quickly yeah, talk to them about Webley, Localize, and Crowden? Maybe just briefly guide them on where to go and how to use them.
So I can just explain really quickly, but the best thing is to actually reach out to me or Adriano for documentation, because it explains it a whole lot more. So essentially what I was saying was like Mantra, Weblet is an open source translation platform. And it essentially organizes all of the resources or all of the information into what are called strings for your source words. And then it actually asks you what target language you want to translate into. So it's an environment essentially where you can translate, you can actually set rules. Like Tebogo actually pointed it out really well where she was saying things like there are some things that you're not meant to translate. You're able in a translation environment to mark things as do not translate. There are things where you mark as what it's called markup language, where you actually create markup language where you state that certain things are supposed to be left as is, as you don't touch them. If there's an apostrophe, maybe you're not supposed to remove that apostrophe from that particular point because it serves a purpose within the code. So it's essentially a platform where you create an environment where you can translate a tool, a resource, and you set certain what do you call it, rules within that environment that enable people to deliver a translation without breaking the developer code. And so essentially that's what the platform is meant to do. So the beauty of it is you can actually pull the translations from, say, a GitHub. Like if your app sits on a GitHub, a lot of these platforms are interoperable, so you can actually use it to pull the translations onto the translation platform so that all it's taking is what is meant to be translated along with the instructions for what's not meant to be translated, what exists within plurality and the like. And then once you're done with the translation and it's been validated and cleared for QE, you can pull it off back onto GitHub. And then it's set up and it's ready to update so that the next update is rolled out and it has a specific number of languages. So that's essentially how all of the platforms work across the board. So Weblet is a lot more developer-centric, but they're working with us to improve their user experience platform. So we recently moved the Localization Lab community off from Transifex onto Weblet. Partly because we wanted to align with the values of the organization, which is working within the open source space and upholding digital rights, digital privacy, and the like. And you find that a lot of the tools and resources we work on are there to enhance access to information, circumvent internet shutdowns or internet disruptions, encourage enhanced safety and security of people as they're traversing the online space. And you find that Bitcoin as a tool, along with the platforms and the resources that are used to encourage the use of Bitcoin, also kind of fit into that remit when you're looking at it from a human rights or digital rights perspective. And so there's value in having them existing on these platforms for translation. But also what's really important about that is, and it's something maybe that I left out in the presentation, which is we're not meant to view translation as a one-time thing that's interesting to do, but it's actually a skill set that you build over time. Like Tebogo pointed it out very well. She articulated very well how she actually built her skill set because it's a sustained effort. Like if you're dedicating that, you're going to be working on specific tools and resources within the Bitcoin space in order to enhance financial freedom, in order to enhance access to financial resources, in order to uphold the human rights of others to access resources at as low cost as possible. You need to think about it and approach it from that mindset as a translator. So it's not something that we're doing for fun. You're doing it because you are actually potentially saving someone's life. You're doing it because you are sustaining someone's livelihood. You're doing it because at the end of the day, even for you, yourself, and the communities you come from, you're trying to enhance each other's financial freedoms. And that's, I think, the very important aspect of how we should approach that. So that's what I would say along with the additions.
Okay, thank you so much, Chido. Kgothatso, can you please get the link ready for Mantra so that we can play around and see how it works so that we can finally see this tool live in action. But otherwise, I don't think we're gonna take questions because we are 11 minutes over time. Chido and Kgothatso and Tebogo, can you please put in the chat how, if anyone on the call wants to ask you a question or follow up on something, how they can reach you? Just put it on the chat and then they will take the details from there. But we've come to the end of the session, and honestly, I want to leave you with this. Translation is where the work begins, right? But localization is where the impact happens. If we want real Bitcoin adoption across Africa, then we need to build in our languages for our people and for our communities. And this is how we move from awareness to understanding and to actual usage. So our website is there, exonumia.africa. Please go through it. If there's any feedback that you want to give us on that, please do. If there's any work that you think you can, help us with, please shout. And otherwise, thank you again to our speakers, and thank you to all of you who've joined us today. We truly appreciate your time and your presence. And yeah, this call was recorded. So if you want the recording for you to, for future reference, you can let me know and I will gladly share it with you. But otherwise, thank you so much. And until next time, have a great evening.
Thanks, Momo. Thanks, KG. Thanks, Tebogo. Thanks, everybody on the
So
call. Appreciated.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone. Have a
guys.
good night.